Hello my friends, HM here. I make videos about topics that are important for whether the future of humanity will be better or worse. Today's video discusses how war will look like in the near future, where spy satellites and autonomous drones can be deployed on a massive scale because they are becoming far less costly to produce. I also discuss how this development will affect the need for infantry fighting vehicles, tanks, and heavy artillery. You should know that today's video is part of my longer video number 7 that entertains the idea that SpaceX is uniquely positioned to make spy satellites and autonomous war drones better and faster than any other company on the planet. You can find a link to my longer video number 7 in the text below this video. With that said, let's get to it. So how else could SpaceX Shaheeds and spy satellites be used? Obviously, if you have tens of thousands of SpaceX radar satellite in orbit, you will know a lot about the exact position of your enemy's ships, airplanes, tanks, armored fighting vehicles, artillery, radar stations, anti-aircraft guns, etc. And you will have all that information updated globally, say every 5 to 10 minutes, and it'll be 24/7. There won't be any let up in this. So you'll basically have one big movie about the Earth in high resolution that can pinpoint where everything is. And SpaceX could sell this information to subscribing armies for, I'd say it's a global market of 10 to 15 billion US dollar annually. And there should be the same cost whether it's peace or war. It's not that you can suddenly subscribe to it if a war breaks out. It actually is very valuable in peacetime because you will not be taken with your pants down at the toilet by your enemy if they attack. You will know exactly when they're building up an attacking force. So that's why peacetime is just as important as wartime with regard to this information. Also, we should recall that radar, or these SAR satellites, synthetic aperture radar satellites, they see equally well day and night. So you cannot hide at night, nor can you hide under vegetation. You cannot hide the tanks under vegetation as we do today, or under some military camouflage nets. That won't work with radar satellites. They see right through that. The only place you can hide is actually in warehouses that have big doors where you can drive tanks and trucks and stuff in and out of these buildings. But then again, if you have a video of the Earth that's updated, say every 5 minutes, then you can simply have an AI computer identify where are all the warehouses in the world and what is going in and out of these warehouses, so we can have an estimate of exactly what equipment is inside these warehouses, even though you cannot see inside these warehouses. And this is not just pictures of the Earth and where all the equipment is. You will have exact GPS coordinates of where all this equipment and stuff is. So that means you can actually start attacking right away if you have targets within the range of the drones. And then it's just a matter of how many drones you can launch, how quickly you can destroy these targets. But of course also the enemy will have defenses. Although, as I've said in the previous slides, normal air defenses that we have today with using missiles that shoots down airplanes, these defenses doesn't work on these drones because we only have like 100,000 of these missiles, but we can make millions of these drones. You need other drones to combat this threat or it won't work. And you need a lot more of anti-aircraft gun. And if you don't have enough human operators to feed drones with target coordinates, then the drones can also be launched in the future. If SpaceX takes this up, they will have built-in autonomous attack mode, so you can just launch them over enemy territory and have the drones find their own targets and destroy them. And the scale is really all that matters here. And just wanted to repeat here, you can get 1 million of these 200 kilo attack surveillance Shaheeds. That should be possible to produce those for 7.5 billion US dollars. And you could probably get twice as many Shaheed Mini for the same amount of money. And how much is that? Some of you may think that $7.5 billion, that's a lot of money. But it's not when we're talking military expenses. For instance, the current war in Ukraine, it compares to about 1.5 months of Western aid for Ukraine, both civilian and military aid. 1.5 months, that's 7.5 billion US dollars spent. And also last year, 2022, the annual US military budget was $722 billion. So that would only be 1% of their budget to get 1 million of these drones. Also, compare these numbers to the remaining Russian army assets in Ukraine. I have a graph over here that shows some of the assets that Russia has in Ukraine and how many of them that has been destroyed. Something that's very remarkable is that Russia had, at the beginning of the war, they had 3,300 tanks that were operational in the entire armed forces of Russia, and now they have lost 3,255 as of 9th of February 2023. That's nearly all of their tanks. The only tanks they have left to fight with are actually newly produced tanks, which they can only make one of every day, even after they have sped up production of them, and then perhaps they can make another 2 per day from refurbishing tanks from long-term storage. But these are very old tanks, like 40 years old tanks, 30 years old tanks that has very bad aiming equipment, also bad armor. And the new tanks Russia can build, they can't have the new aiming equipment because they bought that in the West. So they have some old aiming equipment that limit their range to 2 kilometers, but they have the new armor of a new tank. But anyway, my point here is, how many assets does Russia have actually in Ukraine? Well, they do have some armored combat vehicles. They have 7,000 of those left. They probably also have a couple of hundred tanks that they have produced that can be destroyed. And then here we can see they have about 3,000 artillery pieces left in the Russian army, and most of it is deployed in Ukraine. And then they have aircraft. Not even 1,000 helicopters was operational at the beginning of the war, and now 1/3 of them have been destroyed. They had 1,400 airplanes, and 300 of those has been destroyed. So you can see, if you have 150,000 of these 200 kilo Shahid drones, you should easily be able to destroy whatever Russia has in Ukraine completely. But then you also need to destroy the infantrymen, and if you had 500,000 of these mini Shahid, I'd say that would be enough to destroy all Russian infantry also in Ukraine. So the war could be over as fast as you could launch drones if Ukraine had these drones, and there's no defenses really against them currently. But Ukraine also has no defenses against them. So if Russia is the one who gets into mass production with these drones, then they will win the war. Okay, I also want to discuss a little bit about how the introduction of a lot of autonomous drones in the battlefield, how they will affect the use of current well-known weapons. For instance, how would it affect the use of armored fighting vehicles like this Bradley here? If you have a battlefield with thousands and thousands of Shahid drones, I think we will need armored fighting vehicles for sure, because that is protecting infantry from getting killed from these mini Shahid drones that will be everywhere. So if infantry cannot hide inside an armored vehicle or a bunker, then they will run a high probability of being killed really quickly. But the kind of weapon we have on these armored fighting vehicles, I believe that's the wrong weapon for the future wars we are going to fight. Normally you have a heavy machine gun like pictured up here on an armored vehicle. That's a kind of a classic weapon, but that's not what we need, because it cannot shoot down drones. What we really need is a very capable anti-aircraft gun with exploding rounds. It could be this BAE 40mm naval gun that is pictured down here, and I'll show you a video of it in a little while. But that gun is super capable, and I do believe it can be fitted on top of a Bradley fighting vehicle, because it's 1.9 meter high and 2.5 tons. So I think that's possible to fit on top. And if it is a little bit too big, well, then they have to make a new version of this Bradley tank that will be big enough to fit a gun like this. I can say Bradley tank with this gun will be 3.7 meters high in total from top to toe if they do it, and I think that doesn't sound unrealistic. But what is so great about this gun is I believe it can shoot down Shahid drones at 5 kilometers range, so better range than the 3.5 kilometers that the Gepard, German Gepard that I talked about previously could do. And this gun here is also capable of shooting down missiles. I would say that would be subsonic missiles at 2.5 kilometers away. And that means it can also shoot down mortar rounds, because they're pretty slow moving projectiles. And it has a range of 10 kilometers for slow moving targets like a truck or a mortar position 10 kilometers out. That's an insane long range. because normally these Bradley fighting vehicles, they only have this heavy machine gun has a range of like 2 or 2.5 kilometers. This one can hit targets 10 kilometers away. One issue with hitting anything 10 kilometers away is that it will require some really sophisticated aiming gear that will take up a lot of space, and that's why I think there should be a separate Bradley that has a powerful radar that is able to look 25 kilometers away. I believe the radar that was installed on the German Gepard anti-aircraft gun was a 10 kilometer radar because it was small, and you could put a 25 kilometer radar if you had a Bradley fighting vehicle that only had a radar on top of it, and it was a control vehicle that could control other Bradley vehicles with anti-aircraft guns on it. So basically this control vehicle see whatever there is in the sky that is enemy targets, and then direct, either by wire or wirelessly, direct other Bradley fighting vehicles to shoot them down. Then there should be, of course, on a fighting vehicle, there should also be a manual control where they have a standard thermal camera that can pinpoint targets, say up to 4 kilometers. That's what tanks should be able to hit, so there are standard equipment for that. But if you have that kind of gun, they should also have that kind of aiming equipment, but not to see something that's 10 kilometers away. That would be too big if it has this gun on top as well. Okay, and I think the Ukraine war here has shown that tanks and infantry vehicles, they're very easy kills for modern anti-tank missiles. So equipping armored fighting vehicles with powerful radar-controlled anti-aircraft guns, that's a very large part of the solution to that problem that's so easy to kill a tank and an armored fighting vehicle. If they have this anti-aircraft gun on top of them, then they can stop an incoming anti-tank missile. They can even shoot down mortar rounds. And what kind of ammunition does this gun use? I have a picture down here that shows what kind of bullet it shoots. It shoots 40 millimeter bullets, and this is the one here. That bullet here has a proximity fuse, so if it gets within 10 meters of another drone or aircraft or helicopter or a mortar round, then it explodes. And what happens when it explodes? Well, you can see it here on the picture that there are some small bullets here. These are tungsten pellets. They call them tungsten pellets. And there are 1,100 of those. So it basically busts into a sky of high velocity bullets, and 1,100 of those. That's a pretty destructive weapon against soft targets like missiles and infantry. And okay, if it should be used against infantry, then this proximity fuse is probably not the fuse to use. Then it should have a timer also, where you basically said, okay, we have located some infantry people 6 kilometers away, and we have their GPS coordinates, so we aim at them and we shoot a bullet, and then a timer simply make this grenade here explode exactly when it's 6 kilometers out above these infantrymen. If it was triggered by the proximity fuse that normally would be active when you shoot at aircraft, then my fear is that it would actually detonate too soon when it comes down and see the proximity of the ground, and it shouldn't do that. It should explode a few meters above the heads of those infantry. That's how it'd be most deadly. Let me show you the video now here. And I muted the sound. It's mounted on a ship because it's a naval gun, but it's not unnormal for naval guns to be mounted on infantry fighting vehicles and vice versa. Let's see that one more time. So here, dark, and look at it when it fires. Imagine that on an infantry fighting vehicles. Certainly, if I was infantry, I'd love to have that kind of gun on my vehicle. And also protect against incoming anti-tank missiles. That's really what they need. Okay, the next weapon I like to analyze in terms of how it would be affected in a future where you have lots of autonomous drones flying around is the main battle tank. Will we need these tanks in such a future? That's a question. And my answer is yes, we will still need tanks for a few reasons, but the need for them will be greatly diminished. We will not need as many tanks as we have today, probably only 1/3 of the tanks. And to understand my reason for that is that we need to understand what a tank does. It's the biggest gun on the battlefield. In close combat, it's the biggest gun. And that's a very important thing, But when you have Shahed drones flying around that have a warhead of 35 to 45 kilo, of which like 90% of that warhead is explosives, the rest is packaging, and that we should compare with a tank shell that is typically a 20 kilo thing when it's a 120 millimeter tank shell, that's standard NATO tank shells. But less than half of that is explosives. And the reason that there's so much steel in it is the same for artillery, that you need a lot of steel to keep the shell together when it's fired out of this gun at really high velocity, like 2,000 kilometers per hour. So you need a lot of steel to prevent the explosives in it from actually detonating, or the shell from deforming when it's pushed out at that acceleration. So with these Shahed drones you have a much bigger bang, and that's something you can use for close combat. You can see how much would it take an infantry sitting in a armored fighting vehicles. They locate a target and now they want that target to be destroyed. They could call a tank to do it, of course, or they could call one of these Shahed drones that could be 6 kilometers behind enemy lines, and it could be launched from ground, and then it will take like 3 to 4 minutes to arrive at the destination. And if it's already in the air, it will only take 2 minutes to get to the target when it flies at this 185 kilometers an hour. So there are only two advantages actually of keeping a tank. One is that the shells of a tank cannot be stopped by an anti-aircraft gun or mini Shahed drones. They fly too fast to be stopped. Also, it may be faster to shoot a target requested by infantry. A tank is right there on the battlefield and it shoots its shells at really high velocity, so it may be faster to destroy a target, and time is sometimes of essence. So no, I don't think tanks will be obsolete because of these autonomous drones, but the need for them would be greatly diminished. It would be more important to have a lot of drones available. The problem with tanks, however, is that they are easily destroyed by anti-tank missiles, as has been demonstrated in the Ukraine war. And also in the future, I think they'll be easily destroyed by these 200 kilo Shahed drones. And how are these drones going to destroy these tanks? Well, you could sit in an armored fighting vehicle and use its aiming equipment to pinpoint the GPS coordinate of an enemy tank. And then you basically request a Shahed strike on that tank on those coordinates. And alternatively, an infantry who is out in the open, they could have this gun that I was talking about that SpaceX should also make with a thermal camera here, where they could aim at a target and then basically push a button, and then a Shahed will come, either a small Shahed or a large Shahed, depending on which button they press, and it will come. So I think that's how it will work. So therefore, in future drone wars, I think tanks will need to be protected by armored fighting vehicles with powerful anti-aircraft guns on them, but they also need to be protected by swarms of mini Shahed drones that can detect incoming missiles and destroy them, and also incoming drones and destroy those as well. That's the role of this mini Shahed in a defensive role for tanks and other stuff on the battlefield. Now there's one more important type of weapon that we need to discuss, how that would be influenced in the future by an abundance of autonomous Shahed-like drones. That's artillery, of course, and my expectation is that 155mm heavy artillery, which is standard in NATO, can be fully replaced by an abundance of 200 kilo Shahed drones. And you may think I'm a fool for saying that, because current war in Ukraine shows that most Ukrainians and most Russians are killed by exactly this weapon. A lot of artillery is used on the enemy and it kills a lot of people. Main killer. So why can I say something as crazy as saying it won't be needed at all? Well, hear me out. I have listed now 7 reasons why the Shahed 200 kilo can overtake completely that role. And the first reason here is cost. You need to fire about 100 shells costing about $1,000 a piece before you actually hit a target. I showed you this picture with a field littered with craters that had hit nothing, and only a few of these shells are actually hitting enemy targets. So it's quite expensive to use artillery to hit anything. 100 of these shells costing $1,000 each. That's $100,000 you spend. And a Shahed can do the job of hitting something for $7,500. And then you might say, okay, but some of those will be shot down because of air defenses. that's true. So let's make it free. So you need to spend 3 shaheeds here, and that would be $22,500. You need to spend on shaheed to get the same job done. But then again, if you have to shoot down shaheeds, then the enemy also spend resources shooting these shaheeds down. They spend ammunition on anti-aircraft gun. They spend drones that needs to target these shaheeds. So it's not a complete loss. For those, you actually lose. So cost-wise, I think it's much cheaper to destroy enemy targets using shaheeds than conventional artillery. Maybe I should say here that there is this one advantage about heavy artillery. They cannot be stopped by anti-aircraft guns or mini shaheed drones because they fly too fast to be targeted by these things. So that's an advantage of them. But I don't think it's enough. The other thing is time to fire. It requires more time, people, and equipment to fire 100 heavy shells with artillery rather than launching 3 shaheeds to do the same job. Note that these 200 kilo SpaceX shaheeds, they can be launched from a paved road that are everywhere, just using a landing gear where they can be lined up on that road and just ready to go with somebody pushing a button to request a destruction of a GPS coordinate that has been located on some enemy targets. And the third reason here is detection of fire location. It's very easy today with radar systems to detect exactly where heavy artillery is firing from. As soon as they fire, you have a pinpointed GPS location of that artillery, and then you just send a swarm of drones to destroy these artillery guns. So I think they'll be very short-lived in a future battlefield where you have lots of these shaheed drones available to send at GPS targets. The same thing doesn't really apply for the launch of shaheeds, because you could launch them and then they can fly for a few kilometers below the radar, and then the enemy doesn't know where they was launched from. But of course, if you have airborne radar or you have satellite radar, then you can locate those shaheed where they are launched from, because you can see them from space or from an airborne radar. But the enemy may not have that. Russia certainly doesn't have enough radar on the battleground, and they have very little airborne radar, and they don't have satellite radar, barely, to do this job. And the fourth reason here is that you can do, with shaheeds, you can do simultaneous all-around attacks. The attack angle can be simultaneous, and it can be coming from all sides. You can't do that with artillery. It comes in from one side and only one side. So all you need to protect yourself against that is the openings for your bunkers and so forth just needs to point the other way of where the artillery shells are coming in from, where the enemy is located. And then you have effective protection against that. Whereas the shaheed can just fly around and then come in from behind and go right into a bunker door, or if that door is open, it can fly right in and explode inside the bunker. And also this thing about hitting stuff simultaneously. Whenever you shoot an artillery, it's a sequential thing. First you shoot one shell, then you load as fast as you can, shoot another one. But when the first shell hit, you have already warned those that you are shooting at that they have to seek shelter immediately, because there will be more rounds coming in. And then it will be far less effective, that artillery strike. With shaheed drones, you can basically attack simultaneously. All of your shaheeds will be coming in at the exact same time, and boom, you cannot run for cover because it will be too late. There will only be one bang and then everything explodes. So that's another reason why shaheeds are just better at destroying the enemy. And then of course is how destructive are a shaheed compared to an artillery shell. Well, shaheed has this warhead of 35 to 45 kilos, of which most are TNT, dynamite, whereas a standard 155mm shell, it weighs 43 kilo. It's a heavy thing, but it only has 7 kilo of TNT in it. The rest is simply fuse and metal to keep that shell together when it pops out of the barrel at 3,000 kilometers per hour. It's an insane amount of metal that goes into this, and I didn't know that until I actually investigated it. I was quite surprised about it. So it's a much bigger bang. It's much more destructive a drone than an artillery shell. And then of course there's the range. That 155 artillery shell, most of the guns only shoot 30 kilometers, but some of the best guns can shoot 40 kilometers. And then there is an exotic Excalibur shell that has its own propulsion system built in, and it costs a fortune. Currently they cost something like $60,000, but in mass production you could probably get them down to $30,000 a piece. But they have even less explosives in them because they need propulsion system and also guidance. And the Shaheed has a 600 kilometers range. And understand this, the Shaheed, they still have 600 kilometers range if they're used in close combat on the battlefront and are launched from 6 kilometers behind enemy lines. Then they will have not only this warhead, 35 kilos of explosives in the warhead, but they will also have an almost full tank of gasoline. That will be 100 liter of gasoline. So it will be an explosion with a lot of dynamite and a lot of gasoline, so it will be even more destructive when it's used for short-range combat. And the range of 600 kilometers is such an enormous advantage. It's an enormous advantage over traditional artillery. And then there's this thing about reusability. Whenever you shoot an artillery shell, it's over, it's done, you cannot use it twice. Whereas these drones, if they don't find a target, or the target is gone by the time it arrives, it just flies back for refueling and another mission. So it's not that you lose the ability to use it again as it is with artillery. Also, another thing with artillery is that they have all these misses, like only 1 out of 100 actually hits the target. And then there are a lot of unexploded shells that just hits the ground without exploding, but they still have this armed fuse. So now they are lying there all over the field as almost landmines. When the war is over, you have to clean all these shells out of the ground, and it's not easy because they are armed grenades that hasn't exploded. It's just cost a lot of money to clean up after the war, whereas these drones here, they can be programmed to detonate if they crash, simply to make it less costly to do the cleanup after the war is gone, or if you take enemy territory that is littered with debris from the war, it's much easier to clean up the ground. So these are my reasons why I don't think heavy artillery will be used in the future. We just used a lot of drones. It's cheaper and it's better, more effective. So I hope you were convinced by that. Okay, and now I just have some sources and attribution for previous slides as always, and you can download it if you follow the link below this video. If you found this video interesting, consider giving it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching my video. I wish you a healthy and fulfilling life in freedom and democracy.